Some of you may be looking for seats. We're just so excited about today. So glad to have everybody here in the room with us. My name is Angela, or Angela Valenzuela. I'm in the Department of Education, Leadership, and Policy. And I'm just really excited about today. And what I want to say simply is that we are in a crisis right now, but it doesn't mean that we're not without power. We do have power, and I'm so inspired by our young people, especially SEAT, students engaged in Texas. We just have an organizing meeting, like we have a chapter formed pretty soon of SEAT.
¡Sí se puede!
Sí se puede! I love that energy in the room, and I think it's really important to, first acknowledge our sponsors, but also just to set the tone. So our sponsors are the Department of Mexican American and Latino Studies, and American Diaspora Studies. And in setting the tone, I want to introduce you to my colleague, Dr. Cesar Cruz from Oakland. He's in the Divinity School at Berkeley. He's a motivational speaker, already an accomplished scholar, PhD from Harvard, and he's now pursuing this other trajectory in life that so excites me for him and for the planet. So if you can come, Dr. Cruz, and begin with a prayer for today. Thank you so much.
I came on this side, I just didn't want to give my back to y'all. Sometimes it's hard to pray or do blessings in these spaces because oftentimes those things have been used to colonize us. And so may this be useful in that good way. We gather on land older than any university, any state, any empire that tries to claim it. We must name what we stand in. This city carries the name of a man who declared in his own words, Texas must be a slave country. The name of this city is not innocent. The name of this university is not innocent. Calling our stories, our lives controversial. But before there was Austin, there was Waterloo. Before Waterloo, there was Ticanhuatic land. And so to it shall we return. The land remembers us. It is our duty to remember more than just an Austin telling of our stories. We circle in the spirit of En Lakesh. Tú eres mi otro yo. We do not come to be polite. We come to be truthful. We do come to hold the full weight of this moment together. The grief and the fire. The lament and the resolve. We call upon ancestors, Jovita y Dar, who stood in the doorway in front of the Texas Rangers when they came in with sledgehammers at the turn of the century to try to silence her press. She said, "Women, recognize your rights. Proudly raise your chins and face the struggle." We call upon Emma Tenayuca, who at age 21 led 12,000 pecan shellers into the streets, mostly brown women breathing tuberculosis dust from $3 a week, who said, "I never thought in terms of fear. I thought in terms of justice." Ancestors, we feel you under our feet. In the Ubuntu spirit, I am because we are, and this círculo is open. We do, however, need to lament. We do not rush past the grief. We do not perform wellness when we are wounded. We lament the shooting that shook this campus. We say the names of those lost to gun violence in Texas, in schools, on streets, in Uvalde, and beyond. We also lament book bans. The books they ban are our mirrors. It's been 1619, 1529, 1519, 1492, SB 17, SB 37, attack after attack after attack. The knowledge they try to erase is our medicine. our lives. We lament the attempts to dismantle DEI, not because diversity is a program, but because justice is not a program. We say our belonging is ancestral. We lament the terror of families torn apart, the modern-day slave catchers eye-snatching babies and trying to keep us in fear. We lament the targeting of queer and trans siblings because they are us. If you come after one of us in Texas, you're going to have to come after all of us. We lament the bombings in Iran, the ongoing genocide in Palestine, the invasions in Venezuela and Ecuador, the continual starving in Cuba. And we're not going to fall for the media alibis. We don't look away when empire lies. Lament is a doorway to action, though. Spirituals are laments that can become a soundtrack of liberation. We lament and then we rise, my people. For those who believe in prophets over prophets, they have taken the name of Jesus, a Palestinian Jew, executed by the state for standing with the poor, and turned him into a mascot of empire. We reclaim him, the Jesus of Matthew 25, who said, whatever you do to the least of these, you do to me. But we don't just stand in Christianity alone. We stand with the Buddhist teachings of interbeing, with Islamic Ummah, a global community that transcends nation-state violence and man-made borders. We stand with Judaism's Tikkun Olam and the prophets who stood before Pharaoh and said, let my people go. We stand with Hinduism's Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The entire world is our family. We stand with Ifa, teachings in Yoruba, that every human is the carrier of Ori, sacred purpose. What is yours and what is our collective sacred purpose, mi gente? We stand with Mexica and Mayan ways of knowing, of Enlakesh. We are sacred and interconnected. We stand with indigenous ways of knowing, Nitakwi or Yasin. We are all our relations. All of our traditions say you cannot build a just world on the bones of the poor. We do not give our traditions to the oppressor. We take them all back and unite them for a time and a moment in Texas such as this. Remember that we have been here before and we've won and we will win again. We remember our neighbors in Arizona when they banned Mexican-American studies, when they seized all the books from the state and the people occupied buildings. They chained themselves to school boards. They sued the state. They took it to the Supreme Court and won. And now Mexican-American studies has spread like wildfire. I am so excited for the victories that are coming in 2026 and 2027 in Texas. And you will spread hope and joy like wildfire. Just believe it. Empires fall, y'all. The land remains. The people remain. The ancestors ask us to remember what we carry. Thousands of years of knowing how to survive. We know how to feed communities, how to build movements, how to love across difference, how to dream toward a future that has not yet arrived. See it and close your eyes so you can open up your third one if you must. This is wisdom. Go with the words of all of our traditions ringing in our ears. Justice. Justice we shall pursue, and justice we will win. Please, my people, go make necessary trouble. Go be the ancestors your grandchildren will call upon. Be not stuck in I'm afraid. Be the manifestation of all of the collective greatness that you come from. And if you have to use AI, use the original AI, the ancestral intelligence within.
Thank you so much for that beautiful and really moving beginning. I'm going to hold on to that. Thank you. Welcome everyone to this exciting and very timely panel on Censored University, the crisis of free thought and education policy in Texas. My name is Lauren Gutterman. I'm an associate professor of American Studies and Women's Gender and sexuality studies, 2 of the 7 departments being slated for closure here in UT. I'm standing in today for the irreplaceable Carmen Chavez, professor of Mexican American and Latino Studies, who helped organize and plan this event, but who sadly has come down with the flu. So that said, I will serve as the moderator today. I'll begin with some brief comments to contextualize our discussion. I'll introduce our incredible speakers, and then I'll pose some questions for them before opening it up to the room. I believe we have till 7, so we should have ample time for your questions. So, as many of you know, Texas has become one of the primary battlegrounds in attacks on public K-12 and higher ed education. From laws resulting in the banning of critical race theory and the 1619 Project in K-12 schools, to the end of DEI programs, the weakening of tenure, and the end of shared faculty governance in Texas's public universities, Texas has become a testing ground for the vision of higher education endorsed by the Heritage Foundation, the Manhattan Institute, and their small subset of far-right donors. These battles are not merely legal. So, for example, in 2025, the Texas legislature passed and Governor Greg Abbott signed into law SB 37, which took decision-making power away from faculty members and put it into the hands of regents and upper administrators by, among other things, eliminating democratically elected faculty councils. Importantly, advocates such as the American Association of University Professors, working together with the American Federation of Teachers and others, worked tirelessly to ensure that this new law, SB 37, did not include ideological bans on teaching related to sex, gender, race, and ethnicity as they had originally proposed. But over the past academic year, Texas public university systems have done what the law did not do. In the fall of 2025, several public university systems announced audits of courses on gender and race, which has resulted in the canceling of courses throughout the state. In addition, faculty members have faced firing and other repercussions for their speech, both in the classroom and outside of it, including Professors Melissa McCool at Texas A&M and Tom Alter at Texas State. Then, just a few weeks ago, the UT System Board of Regents passed a policy banning the teaching of controversial topics deemed not germane to a course. But they didn't provide a definition of controversial or a mechanism for determining what content is relevant to any course. And at public universities statewide, administrators have begun efforts to close entire programs in gender and women's studies, which is what happened at Texas A&M, and to consolidate gender studies, Mexican American, Black studies, and American studies into new configurations here and elsewhere with little to no faculty input and no intellectual or scholarly rationale. In the face of all these changes, our panel today asks, what do we make of the censored university? How should people who care about professors' academic freedom and students' freedom to learn respond in this moment? So tonight we have gathered a truly incredible group of speakers to help us answer these questions. First, Nikole Hannah-Jones is the Pulitzer Prize winning creator of the 1619 Project and a staff writer at the New York Times Magazine. Her deeply researched reporting on racial inequality and injustice has earned her a MacArthur Fellowship, among many other awards that she would not let me name. Her 6-episode Hulu documentary series, The 1619 Project, won the Emmy for Best Documentary. An institution builder as well, Hannah-Jones is a founder of the Ida B. Wells Society for Investigative Reporting, founder of the 1619 Freedom School, a free after-school literacy program in her hometown of Waterloo, Iowa, and a founder of the Center for Journalism and Democracy at Howard University, where she serves the inaugural Knight Chair in Race and Journalism. Next, we have Jonathan Friedman, who is the Cy Sims Managing Director of U.S. Free Expression Programs at PEN America. He spearheads the organization's work to safeguard freedom of expression in the U.S., particularly the unhampered transmission of literature, culture, and ideas. Friedman holds a PhD in international education from NYU and has published and presented widely on free speech, particularly concerning rising governmental censorship of educational and cultural institutions. Friedman was the inaugural director of PEN America's Campus Free Speech program, and he led its expansion of research and advocacy against school book bans, educational gag orders, and government censorship of higher education. And next we have Cameron Samuels, co-founder and executive director of Students Engaged in Advancing Texas. A movement demonstrating youth visibility in policy making. With SEAT, Cameron has spearheaded grassroots opposition to anti-LGBTQ+ mandates in Texas school districts and university campuses, introduced state and federal legislation to elevate student rights, and testified before the U.S. Senate at a hearing on book bans. Recognized publicly by President Barack Obama, Cameron was named one of Teen Vogue's 21 Under 21, and they received the Human Rights Campaign's Trailblazer Award. All right, so I have some prepared questions for our panelists, and I have a question to start for Jonathan, but before we begin, I think you wanted to make a comment about the empty chair we have up here today.
Yes, I do. Thank you so much, and thank you all for being here. I just wanted to, before we get into talking about censorship here at UT, Texas universities, in Texas, and the United States generally, I also wanted to draw your attention to an empty chair that we have here on the stage. This is a tradition for us at Penn and Penn centers around the world to symbolize a writer who could not be present because they were imprisoned, detained, disappeared, threatened, or killed. Today, we are dedicating our empty chair on the stage to Galal El-Bahiri. Galal is an Egyptian poet, lyricist, songwriter, and activist who has been imprisoned since his arrest at Cairo International Airport in March 2018 while attempting to travel abroad. Just this past week, on Thursday, March 5th, marked 8 years since his original arrest. What was his crime? Bahiri wrote the lyrics to a popular song in Egypt that dared to mock President al-Sisi. It went viral on YouTube and used humor and satire to highlight political corruption and economic inequality. For that, and for his poems, Bahiri has been accused of, quote, insulting the president, insulting the Egyptian army, and spreading false news. He has endured torture while detained, and despite completing his initial sentence in 2021, the Egyptian authorities have continued to introduce new charges to keep him detained indefinitely. Bahiri was once known as the poet of Egyptian universities, for speaking on campuses and using his art as a form of peaceful protest. Even in prison, he continues to write poetry and smuggles his words out through his family so they can reach the outside world. This is a short excerpt from a letter he wrote in 2023. My voice betrays me and breaks inside. In my silence is my death. Singing is a passion. My dear country, how can I sing to you if I saw my death for one song? I encourage you all to learn more about Galal El-Bahiri's case at our website at penn.org and help us call for his release.
Thank you for that, Jonathan. So to start us off, my question to you is, why is it important to understand what is happening at Texas colleges and universities as censorship?
I've been monitoring what's been going on with censorship from governments in Texas and around the country for now 5 years. I know we're coming up on the 6-year anniversary of 1619 Project, and I know this because we're coming up on the 5-year anniversary of the effort to ban, censor, and prohibit the 1619 Project. And what I think is happening right now in Texas universities is, on one hand, deeply familiar, and on the other hand, a new evolution. We have seen just about every tactic, in some sense, that is being now tried at UT and other Texas universities, in schools, in libraries, and at other universities around the country for 5 years. What are those tactics? They include vague laws. They include encouraging everybody to think twice about how we talk and how we speak and how we teach because of fear of potential repercussions. It involves sometimes twisting what it is that someone says or what it is that a law says just so you can get people in trouble. I see incredible parallels between things that are happening in Texas. You mentioned the McCool case with, for example, in Oklahoma, when school boards were punished for violating a law, even though the law, for example, was to take effect in September, and they were punished for activities from the previous summer. It makes no sense. It defies any logic. There's no reason to it, but nonetheless, what are people to do but comply? So why is what's happening now censorship? It is one thing to set out with the task to say, there are problems with universities and higher education, let's fix the problems of tuition, or we want to speed up the time it takes people to graduate. Or let's, get a group of people together and really analyze our curriculum and ask if there are ways we could improve it. Student learning, outcomes, retention, job success. I don't remember that meeting. I don't remember that conversation. And certainly no leaders of Texas universities have been much engaged in that project. And they might say that we have to get rid of this department or cancel that class or make sure that nobody reads about Plato because somehow this is bad for education. I'm not sure. But we all know, right? It's quite obvious what's really happening here is nothing short of an effort to exert control over people's minds. And I think we have to reckon with that and understand that we are all becoming inured, used to, accustomed to this as what we are living through, and that's just ordinary. And I think a lot about a 1978 book ban case in Massachusetts. This was a case in which one parent tried to challenge one book in the school because it had a poem in it that they didn't want their kid to read. The poem itself was written by a 15-year-old girl about catcalling she experienced in New York City. So it's her authentic experience of being catcalled in New York City turned into a poem. Now, in this case, the judge sides with the school district and with the defenders of intellectual freedom. No, we can't just censor this book and ban it for everyone because one parent didn't like it. And it wasn't even a question. This is 1978. But what the judge said in that case, he said, the threat here is not the ready access to a wide range of ideas. The danger is mind control. And if you're saying to yourself, boy, that's a bit over the top, We're just talking about like one book. But we have to snap out of that and recognize that actually, on so many other issues, many people have advocated with that certainty, passion, and uncompromising certainty about the freedom to think, the freedom to learn, the freedom to speak. And if we don't start standing up, this is not about whether everyone in this room or everyone at university should love gender studies or the Department of Mexican American Studies. Fine, let's talk about it, let's debate it, let's discuss it, let's read about it. Okay? But none of that is what is at issue here. And what is spreading is a fundamentally anti-intellectual effort. And when you step back and you see that the kinds of books, as I have, that have been banned in schools, often for ludicrous reasons, the kinds of laws that have been passed all over the country against schools and libraries and universities the inevitable conclusion is this is a widespread effort to put boundaries around how we think and how we talk. And when you think about, I think about serendipitous moments in my own teaching, or with audiences, or with kids, or with students, or learners of any ages. You know what the best part is? It's when somebody in the room asks an interesting question that you haven't thought about before. And your head goes somewhere that you've given this lecture 100 times, you've read that book before, something new sparks. And that's really interesting. And that's knowledge, that's education, that's what college and universities are for. And that, if we're going to say now, we want you to teach, but there are these guardrails around it, and we want you to have that spark of energy, but not around certain words and certain concepts and certain things, then that isn't actually teaching. That's not teaching. You can't have teaching without that freedom. It's something else. And I'll let you decide what you think that is.
Thank you. A follow-up question there. Can you help us understand how we got to this moment, right? Because it was not that long ago that Greg Abbott signed into law in 2019, Texas SB 18, which actually aimed to protect free speech on campuses. And in 2022, the UT System Board of Regents adopted the Chicago Principles, insisting, quote, that it is not the proper role of the university to attempt to shield individuals from ideas and opinions they find unwelcome, disagreeable, or even deeply offensive. So these very same forces are now working to restrict where and how college students protest, what we can teach, especially around race, gender, and sexuality, and now closing entire departments.
There's no simple answer to this because, it's not exactly overnight, but indeed when you step back and see that that's what was going on 5 or 6 years ago, it's almost incompatible with the kinds of ideas about censorship which have spread. But I think that the most important thing to recognize is that it is incremental, that 4 or 5 years ago, the same, we saw these laws that were applied to schools and universities, public institutions and trainings. Even the first effort to ban 1619 was rather rudimentary, honestly, compared to, we're going to get rid of faculty senates. You know what the people of Texas really are worked up about and really need is to get rid of faculty senates, which I'm sure most of us, if you weren't in the university, don't know what the hell that is. So it's incremental, and it's gotten more and more specific to universities. And you see that in the sort of evolving logic. A few years ago, it was the problem was CRT, the problem was DEI. Now it's not so much the problem, now it's the need for viewpoint diversity. But all these terms are very fluid. The laws are vague. They get attached to what ultimately is the same ideological campaign, sometimes in different clothes. But the thing is, it sort of learns. If something was successful in Florida, maybe it'll get tried in Texas. And right, it's being tried in Texas doesn't really make any sense. Ask yourself, why are all these university systems and boards now doing something that it's almost like an innovation, rather than try to pass a state law, will empower the boards of all the universities to do it, and then we'll encourage them, or at least we'll see them all do it in different ways. One's getting rid of departments, one's making people sign these new, I don't know if you've seen these loyalty oaths at University of Houston that are coming out. I affirm I'm never going to teach something I'm not allowed to do something. I haven't read it. Well, I admit I haven't read it yet. I just heard about it today. But you see this sort of all the time now. If we put the creative energy, into solving the problems of universities, the real problems that have been put into censoring universities, just imagine what kinds of things we can unleash. So how did we get here? I think some people thought that free speech was going to be the way, and then they started to realize that maybe it wasn't, that they might have preferred the other way. But it's a complicated journey into this moment. But it's very clear again and again. You see fear, you see vague language, and you see all of this resting on this idea that we'll put something out there and then we'll just use it to enforce however we want, and hope that that is a mechanism to force people to apply. And the most important thing there is to force them to tell you exactly when you're breaking the rules. And so, unless they're saying, you cannot teach that exact thing in that lesson, you might as well still cling on to the freedom to teach as much as you can.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And that's something that we have been trying to emphasize at UT, that people should not self-censor in advance. Nikole, this question is for you. How does the banning of the 1619 Project, which is the only book banned by state law in Texas, Education Code Chapter 28-4, how does this actually demonstrate the important lessons of the 1619 Project?
I love that question. First of all, thank you for inviting me here. Thank you for everyone who came out tonight. My brother, what's your name?
Cesar.
Cesar. I am not a religious person, but if that's how we're going to pray, I might join the religion. That was just such a blessing in a non-religious and religious way, and just the important reasons to start this. And honestly demonstrates the fear of Mexican American studies, of African American studies, of gender studies, of studies that actually allow us to have some analysis of the society that's been forced upon us. I just want to. The ban of the 1619 Project affirms the arguments of the 1619 Project because these bans, all of these bans, are one, anti-democratic. We have to understand them in the context of eroding democracy and the intent to erode democracy. That is not ever merely about ideals. And it's about trying to erode a multicultural democracy where we are seeing a demographic destiny that the people in power are desperately afraid of. So we have to understand it within that context. We also have to understand that all bans are about social control. They're about controlling what information we have access to. They're about controlling how we can think about the world, how we can think about ourselves, about the world, within the world. Because, of course, the more that you learn, the more that you challenge power and you challenge the way things are. You don't just accept that the society we have is normal or has to be this way. And, of course, the 1619 Project comes from a place of understanding that what we were commonly taught of as history was really about memory, and that memory was being shaped not by what happened on what day and who did it, but what powerful people wanted us to understand about our country and the narrative they wanted to shape about our country in order to justify a country that is exceptional in ways we should be ashamed of. So, of course there is a direct connection. In fact, one of the first gag orders in the United States was a gag order against talking about abolition. One of the first gag orders was a gag order in 1836. It lasted for 8 years, and it was a gag order in Congress that automatically tabled any discussion of slavery and the abolition thereof. And so you have to think about, why would a body of lawmakers say that you can't even talk about the issue of slavery? Because there's an understanding that ideas are actually the most dangerous thing in the world. They're more powerful than weapons. They're more powerful than violence. And so to even be able to discuss abolition was seen as so dangerous because just talking about it could sow seeds of dissent and lead people to question a political and economic system that, at least half of the people in Congress were making their living off of. Right? Some of the first literature to be banned in the United States was abolitionist literature. There were parts of the South where it was illegal to even have a newspaper that talked about the abolition of slavery. And so, of course, the 1619 Project comes within that tradition. And the idea that if we dare to question the deities of our founders, if we dare to force a recognition that slavery is older than the idea of liberty in the United States, that could fundamentally unsettle the way that power is wielded in this country. So I take great pride, frankly, in how dangerous the 1619 Project was. But I think it's also clear, we were talking about the other state bills, and of course, in 2019, the argument was that we needed ideological diversity on campuses. The idea was that people were afraid to speak, and so I think they were using the research wrong on that, but they were automatically extrapolating that the research meant that conservatives were afraid to speak, even though the studies didn't actually say what the ideology was. And saying that we have to create spaces where everyone is free to speak about their experience and speak about their ideas. If we haven't realized by now how savvy the opposition is in using the language and then subverting it and inverting it. So now anti-DEI is about civil rights. And that white American civil rights were being, and straight people's civil rights were being violated because we were working on diversity, right? That free speech, people wanting more speech was actually violating the rights of people who wanted less speech. They have I just think their imagination is greater than ours. I'm being very serious. I don't think when the first 1619 band started coming out, people thought it was a joke. They didn't take it that seriously, and it was kind of ludicrous. But they understand something fundamental about a society, right? And again, these are anti-democratic. Well, why did they start doing these changes in Texas through the university system? Because they couldn't do it democratically. And so most university systems, including the university system that denied me tenure, is through political appointees. And political appointees, by definition, are not democratic. So we have to see all of this as being anti-democratic. And the last thing I'll say, because I could lecture y'all all night, is I want us to think about what role have we played in the creep against universities. And so when we see, I'm an African American studies major. I am the number one example of why this shit is dangerous. Okay? Black studies changed my life. It gave me a confidence that I never had as a young person, because all of a sudden I knew I did have a history. I did come from people who had contributed things. But I think what we need to understand is that we ourselves have started to treat the university as merely a neoliberal institution that is about creating worker bots. Is this a field where you're going to make money one day? Will you learn a practical skill set? We too began to sell ourselves in that way. And so we rendered the institution vulnerable, because y'all are all adults, right? Like, if you're in college, you are an adult. And the fact that we have allowed people to say what adults who choose to be in a space, who choose the courses that they take, can and cannot learn, and that certain things, our existence as Black people, as Mexican Americans, as Indigenous people, as queer people, just our existence in wanting to study is dangerous enough. We have to take some ownership on how we have allowed that to happen. And the last thing, I know I said the last thing I'll say, I don't even think when they say you can't teach something, I don't even think it's don't comply in advance. I think you have to teach the thing they tell you not to teach. Like, I'm serious. Like, now is not the time for complying against unjust laws and unjust policies that I don't think they can defend in court. So what are we willing to risk in this moment? And it's not saying, well, how close can I get to the line before I cross it? Cross the fucking line.
Thank you. I do have a follow-up question.
I didn't answer your question.
No. That's great. Can you say anything about how history can help us understand why the state of Texas has become one of the primary battlegrounds in these fights over the freedom to learn?
Oh, God. I think history explains everything. I mean, this is why I study history, because history is calming. And so, again, you think about how many of you guys are Texas natives? Okay. So think about the history of Texas that you learned in public school or private school, wherever you got your K-12 education. and understand that that history is curated. It is curated to make you think about your state in a different way. And I think the very fact that we're having these battles now speak to how valuable that curation is to power. Because we are not aware of what our governments and our states and frankly our fellow citizens are capable of. Because we're not taught the truth about what they have done. So we look at how does Texas become a state? Texas becomes a state because white people want to maintain slavery after Mexico abolishes slavery. But when you say that, that's controversial because that makes Texas look bad. But that's just the fact. Like, that's a dispassionate fact. And you can't teach it that way. And so we have been censoring without a legal mandate to censor in a state like Texas all along. So that to me is why understanding these histories, simple histories like how did Texas become a state? Or how do we tell the story of the Alamo, right? One of the most iconic Texas stories. Why are there so many people who speak Spanish in Texas? Why is Texas called Texas? So we have to understand that the battle over histories and how they taught histories have always existed. And the history that we're taught in the monuments that we put up and who we name our institutions after, and certainly what we learn in textbooks, is designed again to control us by giving us a narrative that justifies the society that we have. And when you start to question that, then you see how dangerous accurate history and ideas can be. Because the main tool that power has is making us think that the way we live is normal and inevitable. And it's not. And history tells you that everything we see in our society is a result of a series of choices. And they are all choices. And how we respond today will also be a choice. And when we look back through history at those periods, whether it be McCarthyism, whether it be when they indoctrinated us in the lost cause narrative to justify the end of multiracial democracy in the United States, whether it be how they talked about abolition, we all look back now and we repudiate those societies. And yet here we are. And so now we get to answer to our descendants one day about what did we do in the moment. Which again isn't your question, but that's where I'm going.
This question is for Cameron. Cameron, could you tell us how your organization, SPEAK, has attempted to intervene in these ideological takeovers in Texas?
Thank you. And I started this 40-something years ago as a senior in high school. I was 17 years old, fighting book bans and censorship in my school district. I didn't know we would be in my We've been through a lot these past 4 years. And maybe it was a naive thought, maybe to think that this was going to be ephemeral. But this has been going out throughout history. This has been a tactic to silence and suppress people time and time again. It's just the way you're doing it. Might look different. Might rise and fall. But yet, still, we need people who are responding to this. And so whenever I was a student in high school, seeing that my school district was not only pulling books off shelves for teaching about race and gender, but also banning websites, LGBTQ websites, including mental health resources like the Trevor Project. And I didn't know what to do at the time. My freshman year, when I discovered this internet filter, my senior year, that's when I realized that this was going to be now or never. Book bans were emerging. I was going to sign up to speak at my school board meeting, and it only took one person to do this. I may have been alone in the room that day, but never again was I alone, because I was able to bring together more people. We built a movement locally on the ground, and we packed those school board meetings, just like we're packing the room right now. We filled those rooms telling stories because language is so critical. Right now, what we're seeing with the university A&M, for example, had just banned race and gender ideology. The Board of Regents adopted that policy. And within weeks, the university eliminated its Women and Gender Studies department. The reason? The reason they didn't cite the policy. They said it was because of limited enrollment. There wasn't enough students enrolling in this. Language is how our oppressors are able to frame this narrative and justify it and have so much of the public agree and see that, to just be numb to this. And we need to flip that narrative. We need to tell our stories just as the farm workers in California did in the 60s, telling stories about what it meant to be undocumented, what it meant to be paid not fair wages, what it meant to live in a country that promises something but is failing that promise, just as universities are right now doing the same. They're manufacturing this problem at schools across Texas. And SEAT is working with groups like Texas Students for DEI and others to build coalitions. We're working with the AFT and AAUP, especially the chapter affiliate here in Texas, to bring together student voices in conversation with academics, with faculty, with people who care about this, just as you are right now being here for this. We've organized a variety of different strategies, but they all revolve around people. We have been able to use the power of the press, like everyone who's here right now, with the press and multimedia, right? We're able to channel our stories to where we're not just reaching the people in this room, we're reaching farther. And also whose story is being told. It's our stories, when we are able to vocalize them. We are also organizing teach-ins, including at Texas Tech, where the system there, the Board of Regents, Chancellor, shutting down trans people and identity, coming after a very specific population, one that I am a part of. You know that this is harmful to people. But yet, we can flip that narrative and create a teaching. No matter how distant Texas Tech is to the state capitol, no matter how small of a community the people might think it might be, we are able to create that dialogue and meaningful action, the commitment's there, and that's what matters. You can educate people, because this is what cultural change. We might want to set our eyes first on policy change, and that matters so much. We can't forget about culture. We can't forget about what we are each bringing to the table. If we're just remaining silent, we're not talking with each other, we're not sharing our stories, nobody's going to know what matters most to us. I know what matters most to so many students in the state who are not able to read books that they want to read, who see themselves more in the list of challenged or banned books than they see themselves in the library. I mean, we are the primary stakeholders in education as students. That's what this is all about, is our learning and seeking knowledge. But yet, they're cheapening our degrees. They're abolishing our power in student governments and in faculty senates. They are coming after what is a pillar for our democracy, because education, which might be a commodity in practice right now, but needs to be a public good, is how we can strengthen our democracy. And so we have students all across the state, every pocket of the state. So many students who are organizing in their communities and their school boards even. High school students and college students comprise our movement. And with this, we have different programs like our Advocacy Day. Every year, bringing 300 students to the Capitol last year. Half of them had never been to the state capitol before. This is a problem. There are barriers for people, for students especially, to make their voice heard. Students are passionate. Students know what is wrong, right? We know what is harming us. Yet, we're ready. We're ready to make change. We're not just the leaders of tomorrow, we're the change makers today. We just need to break those barriers. We need to build those bridges so every student can have that seat at the table. So every student can have access to the power that we have in ourselves, but being able to leverage that toward these institutions that traditionally exclude us. We need to build the skills. We need to build the confidence. And that's what SEED is doing as a peer mentor network, where we have students learning from other students in these programs year-round, where we're building the capacity, we're streamlining that access, so breaking the barriers to participate in democracy, because we are the youngest generation right now, the next generation, we're the youngest, and it matters to our democracy, to the longevity of our democracy, the strength and the health of our democracy. We're going to have a democracy in the future. We're going to look to today. What are we giving our students today? Who is growing up right now? What are they seeing in government? Do they find that distrust? Are they disillusioned? Do they feel that they can make a change? Or just Congress and the state legislature going to do what they're going to do, and that's going to get, and nothing happen? No, we're flipping those tables. We're flipping those narratives. Because we can prove that we are here, we have made tangible changes. Representation is something so critical. He introduced a bill to the state legislature, written by an 8th grader, Ayan Molina here, who wrote this bill as an 8th grader, introduced by someone you might know, James Talarico. And this bill, bipartisan coalition, passed the Texas House with a supermajority. So students beyond school boards in Texas. That representation is key. Fortunately, Senator Creighton, who you may know, from the Education Committee, said that he firmly does not believe in students having a say in education. Our bill did not go through the committee. He, unfortunately, is a key reason why Texas Tech is going through what it is right now with these anti-trans policies. We don't know what the Senate Education Committee is going to look like, but we know that we have the power to shape these systems. I traveled to Austin to testify on Senate Bill 37. Did I get to testify? Did anyone here in the audience sign up to testify, or were told that you couldn't register to testify? There are hands in this audience. We showed up to the Capitol. We were told 30 minutes before the meeting even began that we could no longer register. People coming in from all over Texas to register, and they silenced our voices. They silenced the voice of the students and faculty when this was about our voice, about faculty senates, about university departments, that they're now eliminating, not consolidating, because language is important. They're eliminating these departments. And we were told no. We got there so early in the morning, traveling far, that they didn't want to hear our voice because they knew it was so powerful. We showed up to their offices together to ask them why, to ask them to let us speak. And they didn't listen. But we still showed up. That's the story that we told. Our bodies, our voices, our stories is power. We just had to draw within ourselves. And so one key thing is our zine. Creative arts for social transformation is critical, just as we're talking about culture. SEED is a movement that is aiming for these policy transformations, but is also transforming culture here in Texas, acting locally for that global impact. And our zine, our restorative civic history zine, is a documentation of student advocacy right now in Texas, a time capsule for what we are going through right now and how people, how students and communities are partnering with traditional forms of power to transform them, to disrupt systems, to advance the status quo. And that's what we need more of. This panel, we may be something inspiring, but you can inspire each other as well. We just have to look within ourselves and reflect, pray, whatever it might be. But we have that ability.
Can you share any stories with us today about how this attack on that we're seeing on Texas colleges and universities is impacting students around the state?
Yeah, I think I shared a bit of that. But I mean, there's so many students in this room. Our programs director, Christiana, she got accepted into the LBJ School. Here's the thing, looking at the state of our education right now, where are we going? I think, from the high school level, our high school members are considering, where do we apply to colleges? Do we even apply to many colleges here? Do we look outside of Texas, outside of the country? Because we are scared. We do have that fear, but we can't let that, we can't be overcome by that. Because we are able to see that if we stay here in Texas and we do the work on the ground, if we are invested in this, Texas is home for me. Texas is where I was a child, I learned how to ride a bike. Texas is where I was a proud public school, product of public schools, from kindergarten to 12th grade. There is so much here in Texas. We can't just surrender that to other people. And so it really does matter that as we've been here before, we don't get discouraged because we have been here before. Censorship has been here before. And we can learn from our ancestors. We can learn from student leaders of the past, like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, like Mary Beth Tinker, like so many others who have become role models and mentors, like Dr. Valenzuela here, who deserves more than a round of applause. And it's just about relationships and community building, because that is what is going to build us into the future.
Another question for Nikole. Recent efforts to censor course content have affected traditional academic disciplines across the university. Even as the closure of programs has often targeted ethnic and gender studies programs. And journalism schools, of course, have also been subject to state overreach. So we only have to think of what happened to your hire at the University of North Carolina, or what happened to our colleague Kathleen Pelroy when Texas A&M tried to hire her a few years ago to lead its new journalism school. Notably, you are both prominent journalists and you're both Black women. Can you talk about how media and media education is central to censorship on college campuses?
Sure. Her settlement was a lot bigger than mine, but. I think what we're seeing on college campuses is what we're seeing across the United States in general, right? Is an understanding that autocratic regimes that want to be anti-democratic, of course, have to attack and delegitimize and control the press. Where else does that begin but on a college campus, when you're learning the very tools of the trade, when you're being taught how to be a journalist, what's the acceptable type of journalism to do. Both Kathleen and myself, the discrimination was largely for viewpoints, right? The nature of the journalism that we did and the fear that we would then teach that type of journalism to our students, which of course we would. So we have to see that specific type of capture within the larger framework of controlling the narrative and being able to produce propaganda for whatever anti-democratic regimes, whether they be in Texas or whether they be in Florida or North Carolina or in the White House. I think those things have always gone hand in hand.
For Jonathan, could you tell us how organizations like PEN America are working to address this onslaught of educational gag orders?
Yeah, I think, the most important thing really is just education. Ken, you're talking a lot about coalition building, and, I think that's really important as well. But fundamentally, helping people to understand this, because, thinking about history and what you're talking about, Nikole, people would always say to me, oh, well, is the book banning now worse than before? Is this worse than McCarthyism? Is this worse than the Comstock law? And the crazy thing is that the past 5 years is worse than all of those moments. It's got elements of all of those things that we've seen in the U.S. all together at the same time. There are things, things of just the ways in which the Comstock law connects to the rolling back of Roe v. Wade, and the way in which the banning of books about women's body autonomy, and why there's an effort when so many people want their children to have opportunities to understand what sex is and have sex education publicly available in schools. That is not disconnected from the other forms of oppression that are going on. I think, other aspects of education that are so important. There's this idea that, speaks to another point you were making, that trans people, rolled over out of bed around, 2007 or something. They were all born of RuPaul, and before that moment, that was, they didn't exist. But then when you read about, actually the history of trans Americans in the United States, it's absolutely fascinating to read about, between, there's a new book that has vignettes from 1850 to 1950 of trans individuals. It's just 30 or so chapters. Absolutely changes the way you think about this as a contemporary phenomenon. And I think it's, it took me a while to get this, because when I started getting calls about books being banned in schools, I didn't know actually a lot of these books, because they're new books. And what the authors will tell you is, well, they went to school and then they started writing books, a lot of them memoirs, a lot of them graphic novels, that were going to be more accessible to the young people, written in a way that would encourage young people to enjoy books and reading. And we didn't get to literacy, but that's part of this too. It's a lot harder to control people if they are, read, if they are educated, if they talk to each other, if they can communicate their ideas, right? Control and education go hand in hand. So we actually lived through, we lived through, in most of our lives in this room, an explosion of freedom of expression, actually. An explosion in TV, I mentioned already RuPaul, but an explosion in TV, in movies, in stories, in books, and that is what led to young people, frankly, to use an example like Hannah, who went to public school and got to read books about, LGBTQ people for the first time, to the idea, and Nikole, I'm going to date us a little bit, but the idea, I never read about a gay person in school, in a book, from a teacher. Are you crazy? At some point between being a child and becoming an adult, that became a thing that would be okay in schools. And now we're living through an effort to erase that. And that's what's so interesting about this moment, and why actually it hasn't been more immediately successful, is because in many ways, none of us know how or want to live in a society in which a huge number of people are unable to express themselves. But if we don't take account of the fact that it is spreading way beyond schools and universities into, so many aspects of the cultural and art sphere, what plays are being allowed on Broadway, okay? What movies and TV shows and stories, what characters are being allowed in Disney films. Don't forget that just before Trump took office, there was an effort underway where they had already cast a trans actor to voice the first animated trans character, and then they just scrapped it. That happened quietly, I think, by Disney about 2 years ago. So is that coming back? Are we demanding that? Where are we going to see that? And so this effort at sort of erasure and just sort of neutralizing the edges, neutralizing the things that challenge us, it goes beyond any of these laws, and it's this way in which we're all part of it. And my advice and what we're doing is trying to push back against that, trying to unite, and this is what's so inspiring about the work and the mission of PEN, is to unite writers and their allies to celebrate literature and defend the liberties that make it possible. And it is so important. And I can tell you, looking around this room, that this room today has students, it has librarians, it has professors, it has teachers, it has writers. And that is a natural coalition that cares about words and books and education. And we have to start seeing it as all-encompassing. That when, if faculty, you want to know where you can find a whole lot of people cross that road and you go onto this thing called a campus, and there's all these people who care about books, but they were not really paying much attention to what was happening in the schools down the street a few years ago because they've been conditioned to pay more attention to their research in a lot of places, to sort of write for audiences in other pockets around the country. But if you could get faculty to care about book bans, and if you could get teachers and students to care about universities, boy, would that be an incredible force. And so that's what we've got to do now. We have to remember what I was saying about that judgment before. It is very easy to start to accept this kind of creeping bit when it's just a little, it's just like, I get what you say, gender and women's studies, something or other, but come on, we're just in your back department, right? It's just that we can still teach the courses. We have to recognize that this all is incremental, and it might not be all of the university yet, but it is coming. Speaking at Texas A&M, I can tell you the curricular audit there is all over the university. It is crazy. Nobody knows what they can teach, what they can't teach. It's in every school in the university, it's in every profession. Everybody is unsure, and they manage to make everyone uneasy about teaching. And anyone here who's stood in front of a room of people, it's actually really hard to teach people and have people bring up things, and you stand there and think all the time about how you can't, well, I mentioned that thing from the 1960s, or I mentioned that book, but I mentioned this, and it's actually really hard to impose this kind of control of ideas. It's why it's been actually so hard to control books in schools and libraries and universities. None of these institutions is easily amenable to authoritarian control. We have to just remember that that's part of the fundamental thing that actually makes them great. That's what makes them exciting, what gives them that potential to light that spark, and we have to kind of rally behind it.
Could I add something to that? I think, to speak to Cameron and Jonathan's point, and what's really critical for us to understand is this is a political project. The book bans, the censorship, right? And Jonathan has all the data on this. Most of the book bans come from a handful of people, many of whom don't have any children in the schools that they're actually arguing against the bans for. So that tells you that it's not actually about parents who are concerned about what's happening to their individual child. And there's a reason that the two groups that are the most banned are Black folks and queer folks. And there's a reason why amongst the queer community, the most targeted are also the most marginalized and ostracized people in America, which are trans Americans. We have to understand the reason they're doing that is intentional because it breaks apart coalition. You take the people who are the most marginalized, and now you say, we're going to lump them in with Black folks, with immigrants, with Latinos who would have coalition. And we're going to use that to try to tear apart coalition because a lot of y'all are uncomfortable with trans people. A lot of you, right? Think about this is 1% of the population, but think about how much airtime that issue has gotten. And then think about the trans girls in sports, which is 0.00001% of the population. Most people have never met a trans person. They certainly have never played a trans person in sports. And this becomes the issue because you're able then to shave off coalition of people who should have coalition together. And we have allowed ourselves to do that. So they start with the most marginalized and ostracized. So they begin by banning books. Now they're actually trying to ban trans people as a people, right? To say that trans people cannot exist. The federal government does not recognize the existence of transgender Americans. Kansas City is now, right, the state of Kansas require them to turn in their driver's licenses. You're trying to actually legislate people out of existence. And we can look at people who are not trans and say, well, that's not me. They're going after them, and I'm not really that comfortable with them anyway. It's a test case, y'all. They're seeing what will we allow to be done against the most marginalized. Then we allow that, and then we go to the next group. So undocumented immigrants.
They're already there.
Right? And now everyone's shocked that, oh my God, they're getting American citizens to a fucking court. Like, I mean, seriously, it's enraging because we're somehow shocked that we were not protected by whatever was the thing that we thought was going to protect us. There is, in a authoritarian country, there are no protections of you. no matter who you are. And so we have to understand the banning of folks. No, maybe, they're sure that most people are not going to read the books about queer people. They're sure that parents are going to get some little funny feeling in their stomach. Well, I don't really want my 5-year-old to be learning about these people who actually do exist. They actually exist, right? But they know that they're going to play on that emotion. And then emotion overrides your common sense. And then they're able to use that emotion to get you not to really speak up too hard against these book bans, because you kind of agree with not having your kids exposed to a book about trans people who actually do exist. And then they use it to take your other rights. So instead of us having coalition, and by the way, they then accuse you of being elite. People who have Harvard, Princeton, Yale degrees accuse you of being elite. People who have condemned black people for not caring about education and valuing education, then say you get an education makes you elite. Understand that this is a game of politics, that there are political reasons that all of this is happening. And those of us who say, well, I don't want to be involved in politics, well, politics is being involved in you. So, I'm always reticent to speak about the issue because we get so afraid that we're going to fumble in our words, and I think the being afraid that you're going to say the wrong words and makes you be silent about things that you should be speaking up about. So if I do not say the words correctly, understand in my heart when I say this. Maybe there are people who don't agree with the transgender lifestyle. And I think that's insane. It's not a lifestyle. Like, who you are is not a lifestyle. And really, no one should have a right to agree or disagree with how the hell I am. But even if you don't, do you agree that someone should have less rights because of that? Do you believe that there are less worthy human beings because of that? Because trust and believe there's somebody who's looking at you and thinking the same thing. And that's where we have to understand that all of us are tied together. Our faith in a democracy, if we can hold on to it, are tied together. And they use inequality. They use marginalization to convince us, to allow them to take away our rights because we're so worried about someone who we don't think should have the same rights as us getting theirs. So sorry.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I think we should open up for discussion. Yeah, for questions. Are y'all are gonna?
Hi guys. So I kind of want to go back. I'm very strong for the Texas Reentry Project, and I kind of want to go back to the incredible prayer that started the day. And the line that resonated with me was, "Lament is a doorway to action." And I wondered if y'all could kind of walk us through that doorway. What are some concrete steps? Because I do feel like we are in a moment of lamentation in this building. And on a personal note, that's what brought me to activism. I was lamenting that I was being told by the state of Texas that I couldn't teach your book, Nikole. And that's what got me involved and led me to help form the Texas Reentry Project. So what are some concrete steps that we can do in this moment to act?
You got one more? Do you want to go?
I think we're activists. We're all activists. But at the same time, what is activism and what is not? Everyone should be an advocate for ourselves. I mean, we consider our Constitution is a social contract, but also it is a social construct. Democracy, we can hold on to it, right? We need to show up on the front lines of democracy to defend our constitutional rights, because if we don't, then who will? And showing up is going to look different for everyone. We shouldn't be expected to show up in the same way, because if we were all showing up in the same way, what would that amount to? So each of you have a special superpower. You have an audience, you have a platform, you have a circle of people, you have a profession. You have some way that you can tie to the way that you show up so that it matters most. Not only for other people, but for yourself and for the whole community. That is what we need to do. And so we have so many people in this room. There's so many events that happen in this room. Public figures on a weekly basis. Yet, rarely do we fill this room. And that's what we did tonight. So I can see that y'all are ready. And so how can we show up, right? I think that's a great question. And so I think in many ways, you need to be registered to testify come the next legislative session. You need to be talking with peers and changing that culture, starting the conversation so that we know you can have a seat at so many different tables. It could be a dinner table. That could be a faculty table. That could be a boardroom. That can be a classroom desk. That can be so many different things. So you just have to find that. And we are a student movement entirely led by high school and college students. I just turned 22 years old. I think I'm the oldest one on our team. We rely on people like you to show up with us. And so thank you for coming to this event. And then let's see what we can do. We have our team all around here. You can come talk to us right after this event. Let's start those conversations. Let's see how we can work together. And it's a really hard ask to make, but it's one I think we need to make is because you may have resources. If you are someone or know someone who can donate $1,000, can donate $2,000, can donate $5,000, even if you can't, maybe $25 or $100. That is what fuels this movement. We today just spoke on a panel at South by Southwest this morning about the future of public education in Texas with Representative Gina Hinojosa. And on that panel, as we closed, Texas AFT AAUP President Steph Cabo announced that they will be matching up to $10,000 of donations. And Randy Weingarten, the national president of AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, said that they will be matching as well. So every dollar you donate will be tripled today only. And so you can come to us, you can support us, you can grab a copy of our zine, whatever it is. That is what is going to help us make ends meet. Because we don't have a lot of money as a student-led group. But if you can help us build that capacity so that every student has a seat at the table, we'd be so grateful.
Just on the what people can do to add to that. I mentioned educating people before. I think also there is a fundamental need to document what's happening because it so powerfully helps us nationally. You were talking a lot before about telling the story of what this means, of what is happening. Little stories like one professor who couldn't teach Plato get a lot of people paying attention to this. And it's so important that nothing that is happening to you as a student or as a professor is isolated. It's happening to lots and lots of professors, and we have to keep talking about it. The more we talk about it, the more we tell the story of what's going on. I hadn't actually thought of it this way with regard to universities until you mentioned it. It's true, most of the book banning that happened all over the country was like a small number of people. But we're not thinking that way so far about the universities. So what happens if we apply that logic? How many regents across Texas are there, really? And how many students and faculty are there and alumni who believe in Texas universities and that freedom to teach? I'm sure you can imagine that that's a much larger group of people. And so, yeah, they said they're, eliminating courses, and yeah, they said they're getting rid of these departments. But what would it take for them to reconsider that? What would it mean if, many more students all wanted to take these classes? And how could you then say that it was low enrollment? Would that still work? So there is still a window now where things have been announced, but they haven't been met with enough friction. And it's really important to remember that power of friction actually lies in everybody, and there's ways in which many people can get involved with that. And I'll just shout out to Texas Freedom to Read Project over here. If you aren't following their work in Texas or getting involved, they're really just vital resources as well.
Okay, I have something else. I'm going to say this to the young people in the room, including myself, just like these apartments Chicano studies, Mexican American studies, African American studies, gender studies. These were born of revolutionary time and revolutionary action. So I would start by actually researching how these departments and these cultural centers even came to be on their campuses. They didn't come because one day some students said, we'd like to have these, and the campus president said yes. Right? It came from protests. It came from forcing universities to recognize that these were legitimate courses of study. So look back at your history and understand old folks like us are not going to solve these issues for you. All social movements are led by young people. That's why I'm so proud of what Cameron's doing, because Cameron is working in a tradition. John Lewis was in college when he leaves college to join SNCC, right? When you look about Joanne Blanche, who just passed away last week, was 11 years old when she marched in Selma, had already been arrested more than 20 times as an 11-year-old child. We don't have any excuse, y'all. We have more resources and more information and more power than any of our people ever had in the history of this country. How are you going to use it? What are you going to do with it? Is it going to be on your watch that we lose the things that these revolutionary people fought for and gained? Don't look to us. The answer is in yourselves. And I'm going to be very real here. I have been disappointed by how quietly y'all students have allowed them to denigrate your culture by taking away your graduation ceremonies, by taking away your cultural centers and your institutions. And I haven't seen any mass protests against that. Maybe you're organizing underground, maybe not. I'm not trying to shame you, but I am trying to encourage you. You all hold the power at these institutions. Do not go quietly. Timothy Snyder, somebody I've been reading a lot, he has a little tiny book called On Tyranny. It's only about this thick. Anybody can read that book. And I read it because I want to understand myself what is happening in our society and what can we do about it. Of course, one of the things he says is do not obey in advance, which many of us are. We're just letting them do what they do. But what he also says is pick an institution and defend it. You don't have to fight on every front. They are thriving in chaos. They're thriving by making us think. They're attacking us everywhere. So we become immobilized. We become paralyzed. They don't want to pay to go to school here. This is your institution. They answer to you. And let me tell you, one thing a protest does is to tell other people, other folks don't agree with this either. If you're just tweeting out or you're silent or you're just talking in your chat groups and people think that you actually consent to this. If you don't consent, show that you don't consent. But don't let them take what your ancestors fought for. They're not ancestors. These people are still alive. We answer to them, y'all. I'm serious. We answer to them. So get together, get organized, get a small group and grow that group into something larger. But don't let them destroy. They're saying your history is not worthy. That it is not valuable, that it should not be something that you can have to study and have as a degree. They're saying that to you. And the people, your parents and your grandparents' generation said that it was. And they were willing to fight to make it happen. So please, I'm trying to call you into your power. The old folks in here who couldn't dye their hair like I do to keep the grades from showing, we're not going to save you. You have to save yourselves, like every social movement that happened before you. So what are y'all going to do?
I would do one quick comment. Hey, yeah. I don't know how many of you in here have ever been over to the Benson Latin American Collection. It's 2 doors over. And we are a library that is dedicated to Latin American and U.S. Latino studies and the Black diaspora in the Americas. So if you haven't been there, check us out. There's a great opportunity to do that on Thursday, our annual community event, Viva Voz. This year is dedicated to food and particularly indigenous foodways in Texas and the Americas. There will be free food. It's always a great party, so please come over. And then come back and see the Gordian Saldua collection, which is our most used collection.
Okay, so according to a Manhattan Institute poll from December 2025, among GOP men under the age of 50, 54% now endorse Holocaust denial. That is for the first time a majority of people under 50 in the GOP endorse Holocaust denial, or Holocaust deniers. Normally on an institute campus, this would not be acceptable discourse, right? And in institutions, universities, college campuses, were never beacons of free speech, despite what the right wants us to believe. There have always been boundaries that define what is acceptable discourse. And I'm playing a little bit of a devil's advocate here, okay? Is there an extent to which a case can be made that PC culture went too far, and that this is a backlash that is a rational response? Was political correctness also not an attempt to control speech and the freedom of thought? And at what point do we say, what is it appropriate to censor? Who should ultimately decide what gets taught and how, and who gets respectability and who takes it away?
I mean, I have thoughts, but I've been talking a lot. I could be succinct, actually, on this question. I think you can have a debate about whether political correctness went too far or not, but that's not what we're talking about, right? So political correctness are people saying, we actually think that you should be more protective in your speech. We don't like certain offensive ideologies, particularly when it comes to marginalized people who have had that power. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about the state. Right? We're talking about government using its authority to prohibit versus individuals engaging in protest, which is free speech, right? Saying, I protest this speaker coming here because I don't agree with this speaker. That is one person using their free speech. That's different from what we're seeing. And actually, in asking that question, we're actually reifying the propaganda of the state right now. Because the propaganda of the state is trying to make equivalent people who are arguing about, amongst themselves, citizens arguing about what is acceptable speech versus the government, which has the authority to ban and prohibit and make illegal. These are not the same thing. We should never think about them as the same thing. We can have debates, but even saying we can debate political correctness is free speech. The government is actually taking away free speech. The First Amendment does not protect us from facing consequences for speech. People will face consequences. You call me an N-word right now, you're going to face consequences. I'm trying to tell you, right? I'm just being real. That's not protected by the First Amendment. The First Amendment protects us from government intrusion on our ability to have speech. So we need to be very clear in our rhetoric about what it is that we're facing. We can, again, I won't go further than that, but I'll leave it state.
In the hierarchy of threats to democracy, to free speech, etc., the government and the potential to weaponize that machinery is so much higher and more significant than cultural challenges, let's call them. Now, have there been challenges with free speech? Of course there have. There have been tons, and those are not all. There's this argument, that those were all from the left against the right. That's not true either. There have been, just recently at Texas Tech, there was an effort to get a talk by a writer who is a former abortion care provider canceled by a bunch of student groups. That wasn't the government, and that wasn't the left, and that wasn't PC culture. That was conservative or right-wing or extremist conservative activism to silence someone being invited to campus in the precise way that we have been told for years. This is the thing that left-leaning students are doing wrong, and they gotta stop. So don't believe for a second that even the cultural fight about these things was ever so one-sided, etc. There are tons of examples, yes, where I think, the idea of that liberal idea, the idea that ideas, books, can be harmful to people and that means we should ban them. That is not also an argument that is exclusive to conservative parents either. That is an argument that has been marshaled in a lot of places. But I think there's also, in each one of these, there's some nuance. There is a difference between, I am concerned about the way we teach this topic or have conversations about it, and can we approach it with more sensitivity? Or I'm concerned with the way you're using that word because it's kind of offensive, and I don't know, I have a different pronoun, and I wish you would be respectful towards me in that exchange. That's free speech. hey, whatever, you don't want to do that, you want to teach it that way, at the end of the day, should I be able to get you fired and have you suffer great deal of consequences? I do have concerns about that. But those are these cultural things that actually a lot of campuses were getting better about. We're starting to work out until protests over the war in the Israel war in Gaza exploded on campuses, and out of that came this idea that actually maybe the campuses shouldn't be about free speech anymore, or they shouldn't be about particular speech. And that sort of, it used to be very easy for many college presidents and others to lean on free speech as the answer, because it is the answer to a lot of these tensions, until the politics surrounding that issue made everybody a lot less confident. And unfortunately, in a kind of bizarre way, that has led to making this so easy, because it undermined everyone's idea that free speech is something that was important on university campuses. And so 5 or 6 years ago, remember, Halloween costumes being a controversy at Yale and other things, like all these things around free speech on campuses. They were always about private universities. They were often about elite universities. But it was about free speech. Something changed where now you have a lot of universities that are going, well, we need new codes of conduct. Well, we're private universities, so we've never really been about free speech when it comes to protest. So all of a sudden, that has opened the door, I think, to a lot of university leaders and others reevaluating what, until then, they were at least trying to. So now they don't really believe in free speech anymore, and they are much more easily, bullied around these issues by politicians. And you see that sort of undermining. A lot of it is opportunistic, but to say it's a perfect narrative where, the left went too far, so the right is going to punish people, and so you know what we're going to do? We're going to fire librarians in Missouri if they let students learn about Michelangelo's David. That's what we should do. That doesn't make any sense. And you see it, when you start asking and weighing the laws and the punishments and the fear and the censorship and just this incredible movement in erasure compared to what ostensibly was the problem, was people were having trouble talking to each other. But there's a million questions there about respectability, around who, the civility politics of who gets to say what, and questions about who gets to determine the curriculum. Those are very consequential questions. Every time we are seeing this politicized, it's a problem. We need to go back to a time and a place where we believe the power of experts. And every time people are telling you that their parents' rights, so to speak, no parent's rights should mean that then their students don't have any rights. That's not how the idea of rights works, right? And no individual parent's rights should mean that their rights as a parent, or let's say students' rights or regents' rights or whatever it is, should mean that everybody else's rights don't matter anymore. And unfortunately, that seems to be the logic that's going on.
Unfortunately, we are quite over time, so let's have a final round of applause.